Hi, and welcome to Your Irish Connection. I'm here with author Mórrígan Daimler, and we've just been having a super serious informal chat beforehand, but we're on record now, so we're going to get to the questions. So Morgan's going to be horrified because I have just a couple of pictures that I've pulled off Facebook. Ta-da! She's an author of many books. I'll skip on to the first question so you don't have to look at yourself, because I know it's a little bit unnerving.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit, but you're welcome.
Thank you.
When and where did your interest in Irish spirituality begin?
That actually is a very complicated question.
Yeah, it usually is.
I'm obviously not Irish. Very obviously. Where
are you from?
Irish accent. I'm originally from Maine, in the United States. I live in Connecticut now.
Okay.
But I'm part of the Irish diaspora. Could be pronouncing that wrong. One of those fun words I've only ever read.
Yeah, nerd girl pronunciation.
Yes. But something like that. So, and the Irish diaspora is kind of its own thing. It's definitely not Ireland Irish, but it's something. So growing up with that was it really instills a feeling of being connected to Ireland, even though you're not Irish.
Mm-hmm.
So it gives you a sense of having that longing for it. My grandfather was from Cork, so there was a lot of hearing stories about that, and just a lot of pride in the family coming from there.
Yeah.
I have other relatives, of course, that came from different places, because America really is that giant melting pot, which everyone talks about. But the Irish was a big thing in my family. And so I don't remember there ever being a time when I wasn't interested in it. But up until I was about 10 or 11, I didn't realize that it wasn't anything except for the more folklore aspects, I guess we could call it. I grew up with a very strong belief in the good neighbors. My grandfather would always pour out a little bit of his beer whenever he was outside before he would drink any. So things like that. And that was something that was just strongly ingrained in me, even when I was really little. I also always personally had a very strong, I don't know how to quite describe it. Like, I was always aware of them. My dad was Catholic, Irish Catholic, I'll specify, because that's a very particular flavor of Catholic. I'm sure you're aware. Different from all the other flavors of Catholic out there in the world.
Yeah. Unique.
Yeah, it is unique, yes. And my mother was actually a Congregationalist. So in one of these fun little cultural interaction things, when they got married, much to the complete horror of their families, they had to actually agree not to raise any of children they might have with any religion.
Okay.
Which was sort of the only way their families would allow it. So my sister and I were raised, I like to call it secular agnostic. It was sort of the way they kept peace with the families. So, we had the folklore, like I was raised understanding and respecting that the good neighbors were there and you didn't piss them off, because that was not a good way to stay healthy and in one piece.
No.
But we never went to church. We didn't do any religious things, which I guess is sort of a strange childhood. And I would always talk about seeing the good neighbors and sort of the strange things that I saw and experienced when I was younger. And everyone sort of humored me. It was never discouraged. So when I was about 10 or 11, I found out that paganism was a thing, which was quite a revelation. It already sort of fit in with what I sort of believed about the world, because of all this. And because I wasn't raised with any other religion, I just sort of went with it. And I immediately started reading Irish mythology, and particularly the stories of the Tuatha Danann and the Irish gods. And I just sort of took it and ran, and I have not stopped.
And was there the internet or anything back then? I don't know how old you are, so I think you're younger than me, are you?
About 6 months.
Yeah.
I'm pretty close to your age.
Yeah.
No, this was back
So
in this was back in 1991.
Yeah.
Dinosaurs still roamed the earth.
I know, there wasn't even mobile phones. Or maybe those bricks. Yeah. Those big bricks. Yeah.
You still had to go and put like quarters and it might have still been dimes actually, and pay phones, and there was no civilization. It was anarchy.
At least you had payphones. Try being in rural Ireland. You had to walk 3 miles to the nearest phone box.
Oh, well, the town I grew up in, it actually, I kid you not, used to be nicknamed Cowtown, because we had sheep farms and cow farms, and the only payphones were in the high school in this town. So I do feel you on that one.
Safety, nice. Yeah. Random strangers roaming through the high school.
Yeah. We used to, cow tipping was an actual thing when I was growing up. Although I plead the fifth on whether I actually might have done that.
That's fair. Yeah, fair. We'll not push it. That's not on the question. That too much.
No, you might want to add that though.
Did you ever partake in? No, I don't think so. It would just get boring after a while because everybody just say yes because it's Ireland.
Yeah, I was gonna say how rural was your childhood? This is the question.
Mine was I did that by mistake. Mine was mostly Dublin actually. In I don't know if do you know Ballymun in Dublin? It's where the flats are. There's, anytime you kind of see, horses in an urban neighborhood, that's based on Ballymun and Finglas, basically, in Dublin, in any of the movies, kind of like Barrytown from Roddy Doyle's films. Or I think it was in a film called Into the West with Gabriel Byrne. Yeah.
I have to admit I like that movie.
Yeah. That's pretty much where I grew up. But between there, not really, it was a bit shit actually, but between there and Clare, my family's from East Clare, so we were lucky enough to I keep doing that. Oh, I'm just flicking through all these questions. Okay, wait a minute. Right, there we go, back to the question. So I had a nice grounding in East Clare, because if it had just been Ballymun, I think my outlook on life would have been very different. But thankfully, I was exposed to a lot more of very rural Ireland from babyhood, really, because we were going down a couple of times a year and hanging out there most summers. So that was kind of cool. So that was me. But I kind of got the best of both, I suppose the best of both worlds, the urban and the rural. Being offered drugs when I was still in primary school, that kind of thing, but also like learning how to swim in the Shannons. So it was all good.
Nice. Two slightly different experiences.
Yeah. All of Ireland in a nutshell.
Yeah.
So, how did you practically go about getting started? So there was no internet, we've touched on. So books, courses.
Time before internet.
Yes, amazing. Books, courses, events, people you met, like what were those kind of foundational building blocks for you?
Well, like I said, I did have some practical, I guess you call it, like off-roading experiences. And then a little bit of that family folklore. Yeah. I'm just going to keep saying folklore.
That's okay. It's understood.
The family things that got passed down.
The stories.
The stories. I mean, and I do want to be clear, like that wasn't it wasn't like witchcraft. my extremely Catholic relatives would be horrified if I tried to even imply that it was.
Yeah.
Definitely not. But that strong belief that there were otherworldly things, and there were certain ways you interacted with them and certain ways you didn't. So that definitely kind of started it. And then once I got older, my best friend in school actually was from Connemara. She moved over here in elementary school, primary school. I think it's what we call
primary, yeah.
Yeah.
We do primary up until age kind of 11, 12, 13.
Okay.
And then on to secondary school. So it's just two school cycles we have.
Okay. Yeah. So primary school. And she'd moved over here. So that also kind of helped with my interest, because, talking to her, we got into loads of interesting trouble. Shenanigans, as I like to call it. And then books, not the typical books I think that a lot of people tend to get started with. I was definitely much more into the mythology.
Yeah.
Straight from
there wasn't a lot of practical stuff back then anyway, and that was Irish specific.
Yeah, I don't think there was anything Irish specific in 91.
I'm trying to think what those horrific books that we shall not say the name of.
I think that was a little later in the 90s.
Yeah. They were...
I'd like to hope anyway. I do admit I read Buckland's Big Blue Book, Complete Guide to Witchcraft.
Yeah.
In like 91. So that was interesting. You have to picture me at like 11 reading about like tying naked people up
behind this book.
It's like, this is some interesting witchcraft right here. Because I was reading a little bit about like Wicca, American Wicca, and then British traditional. Not the same thing, even in the early 90s. But more for the Irish spirituality. I was reading like Miranda Green, some of the archaeology, and then a lot of the horrible Victorian, easy to find at libraries, retellings.
Lady Gregory. We all know and love.
Yes, and Charles Squire.
Oh, yeah.
All that.
All that colonial horse shit.
Yes. Yes. And I did get into Yeats fairly early, and I know some people love him, some people hate him. I admit that I love him.
Yeah, I'm a fan, definitely. Yeah.
I really am a huge Yeats fan, I admit it. I love his poetry.
Yeah.
And I also really liked his prose.
Yeah. Well, in Irish culture, he's like, outside of paganism or spirituality or anything, just his poetry. I mean, it's on our school curriculum, obviously, and it's something that we all kind of grow up. We all know W.B. Yeats from kind of earliest schooling, really, and it's good stuff. And the poetry for me, I know, like when I was a kid, even before I kind of wasn't thinking about spirituality or anything, but the poetry was really inspirational and very much kind of connected in with the love of nature and the connection to, the culture and the heritage and the stories of Ireland that I would have been getting from my granddad, my whole life, and my mom. But yeah, no, I'm a big Yeats fan. And then later on, of course, I found out that he was into all sorts of weird shit, and it kind of blew my mind a little bit, Yeah, no, it really did.
Yeah.
And especially kind of after I moved to Roscommon and his connection to Roscommon, and he thought that was kind of one of the most perfect places in Ireland, and they set up that occult society out in the lake in Boyle, and there was all sorts of stuff going on that yes, personally I'm pretty connected to Yeats, so that's what it is for me.
Yeah, I have to confess, I had a copy of Celtic Twilight in my purse for so long that it fell apart. And I had to replace it.
Yeah.
So total Yeats fangirl, it's true.
Yeah. Awesome. So
but yeah, and that was way before courses and events and
actually was there anything practically going on? I mean, what was your community like in the 90s, where you were, or was there
There in the early 90s in this part of the US, there really wasn't anything.
Mm.
Um,
So were you in Maine or Connecticut now on
in
that?
Connecticut.
In Connecticut,
At that
yeah.
point, yeah.
Yeah.
It was somewhere around the mid 90s, I think, that the first sort of occult store opened up around here, and that was like a big to do.
Yeah.
It's still open, actually. It's been around for a while now, but there just wasn't anything. I met a couple people in high school that I started sort of hanging out and getting witchy with, but it really wasn't until I want to say the late 90s that you started to see more of a community springing up, and then you started seeing like the pagan pride days and the idea of events and workshops and things. But the early 90s, it was like a wasteland.
Yeah. I hear you.
There's just like nothing. And particularly at my age, I mean, I was about 11, I think, when I first started really getting interested in it. And if there was anything, it certainly wasn't anything that anyone would have touched me with a 10-foot pole.
Good. That's a good thing.
Yeah.
There were some working at that time who wouldn't have been so conscientious, and so it's a good thing, I think, that you weren't touched with a 10-foot pole or anything else.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So the only people I met were really like in school, friends in school. So
okay, cool. So just for kind of practical stuff, what sort of things do you do on a daily or weekly or, whatever, basically? It's just a little insight into your practice, anything that you'd like to share. You don't have to give, the entire kind of, this is what I do in the day and this is what I do in the week and this, just whatever you want to share.
I say this question can get very,
very long
and involved.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, daily, it kind of depends a little bit. I used to have quite a lovely daily practice with like some meditation and offerings, and then I gave birth to my third child, which is funny because the first two I still managed to have like this nice practice, and they kind of stayed involved in it. And my son is just like chaos in physical form, so he doesn't really allow a lot of daily things. He likes to participate with me, but chaos.
Yeah. You do what you can. Okay, got it.
I still try to do as much as I can, but daily might be more of a goal at this point than an actual reality. I do one day every week I do make an offering to the good neighbors. That's something I've been doing for a long time, and it's one of those things that I've made a commitment to, that at this point I would kind of be I want to say afraid necessarily.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, you wouldn't want to get on the wrong side of that.
Yeah. It would be unwise. We'll put it that way. I think for me to not do it. So, I do definitely do that on a weekly basis. And then,
what does that look like? What, if you don't mind sharing?
Sure.
Yeah, like what does the offering entail?
It's usually cream. I get some cream. It's I might as well start this at the beginning, because shockingly there's a bit of a story with this. Years and years ago, I had started giving them milk once a week, and I don't even remember now at this point why, because this has been going on for so long now. And it was just one of those things where I would give them a bit of milk once a week, and more just as a, let's be on friendly terms kind of a thing. And then my finances had kind of taken a downturn. My middle daughter has a lot of medical and health problems, and I had to stop working. It was when I started writing full time, but there's definitely a significant income difference between working full time and what you're get writing. So, yeah.
Yeah.
And I really couldn't afford to keep even, a small milk offering.
Yeah.
So I stopped doing it. And I think I didn't do it one week on the day I normally would. And then the second week had rolled around, and it was the day that I would normally have made the offering, and I went grocery shopping. And as I was walking across my yard, carrying the gallon of milk, which I had bought, it actually got pulled out of my hand.
Right.
I can't describe it because I know a lot of people, when I tell this story, give me that look like
No.
you just dropped it.
Yeah.
But no, I was holding it very securely, and I felt it actually being pulled out of my hand. And it hit the grass, and the entire container exploded.
Right.
And the entire gallon of milk went everywhere. And I was like, well, I think it's pretty clear at this point that I need to continue, because I would much rather give them the amount that I was giving them once a week than have them taking a full gallon.
Yeah.
I definitely can't afford to be doing.
Yeah.
And it was shortly after that I had decided, even though, the finances still weren't great, that instead of giving them the milk, because we had stopped getting 2% in America. I don't know how this is in Ireland. We have different grades of milk. There's like 2% and 1%, and like water with some milk in it, which they call skim milk.
Okay. Yeah.
Disgusting stuff. But anyway, we had gone down from the whole milk to the 1% because it's less expensive. And I thought maybe this isn't the best idea to be giving them as an offering. And I know you and I had talked about this when we were at the Morgan's Call retreat this year, about not giving them something that's not really a quality offering.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because that's not a good idea either. So I was like, I'm going to find a way to come up with the money, because it's not like it's a huge amount. And I'm going to actually buy them cream and give that to them once a week, to show them that I'm really making the effort. And it is a bit of a sacrifice because it's an expense, and I could get a whole gallon of milk. Ironically, after I just told that joke about the story about the gallon of milk, I could get pretty much a gallon of milk for the same amount of money. But so that's when I started giving them the cream instead, and I've been doing that since, once a week. But I feel like it's the better thing to do, and I feel like they appreciate it, and that it has a positive effect in my household.
Good.
I could definitely fill this entire interview with Morgan's random good neighbor stories. We do not want to get off on that tangent.
That's fair enough.
So suffice to say that even in America, I believe that they are here and around. And
absolutely.
We've had incidents, with negative things happening. They've been annoyed, and with positive things happening. So
it's definitely, well, in my experience, and I'm sure in yours, it's definitely worth staying on their good side, if at all possible, and when possible.
Yes, definitely.
Making the effort to do that.
Yes, my husband's car would agree with you.
Yeah, I remember that story. Actually, do you want to tell that one? Because that's a good one.
Okay, yeah, I will. That is a good one. And that's my classic, like for people who are like, oh, there are no, good folk in the United States. I'm like, let me tell you. Story. So we do have a fairy tree in our yard. It's a hawthorn. And again, I will skip the why I think it's a fairy tree thing. We'll just take it on faith that it is.
Yeah.
And my husband was doing yard work one day, and he happened with the weed whacker to hit the fairy tree, and he took about a palm size chunk out of the trunk of it, the bark off of it. He didn't come right in and tell me, because he knew, like everyone in my house knows, you don't mess with that tree.
Yeah.
And I told him right away, I'm like, you need to go out and make some kind of offering and apologize, because you don't mess with that tree. And he was like, well, I'm in the middle of doing yard work. Let me finish that up. And I had just a bad feeling about it. So I got some honey and some milk, and I think like a cookie. I went out and I made an offering myself, kind of a please don't smite my husband. I'm fond of him and I need to keep him. And I guess he saw me doing that, so he sort of assumed that everything was taken care of.
Okay. Yeah, these things happen.
Yeah. So when he came in and I asked him, I'm like, did you make sure, is it all good? And he's like, oh yeah. And while he'd been out there, he'd actually somewhere else in the yard, he cut himself and his arm was bleeding. I was like, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, it's fine. Totally not related. So he went to take care of that. But when I'd asked him about if he made an offering, he kind of was just like, yeah, everything's fine.
Okay.
Did not specifically say, no, I assume it's okay because you took care of it. He was just like, yeah, it's fine.
Yeah.
So about a week later, I was sitting in my living room with our son, who was about 7 or 8 months old at the time. And there's this horrendous crash. So I get up to look around. It's not like storming. There's no bad weather. It's like 7 a.m. And I look out and his car is parked in our driveway on the side of our house. And there's this, I am not exaggerating, I have pictures. I think I actually had showed you the pictures of this.
Yeah.
There's a 20-foot long oak branch impaling his car. Like a stake from a vampire.
It was pretty intense, actually.
It was. It went right through the rear window, through the back seat of the car, and part of the trunk. So I ran and got him, woke him up because he was still asleep, and the first thing I said to him was, "Did you make that offering to the fairies?" I said the F word. I'm sorry. That is what I said to him, though. And he looks at me. He's like, "Well, no, I assumed you did." And I was just like, "Oh no!"
Facepalm moment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm like, "Well, I think they killed your car." And so we went out, and at the time we'd kind of hoped it might be fixable, but no, it actually had totaled the car. I do think that what I had done with the offerings I had made at least helped that he wasn't in the car.
In the car, yeah. I was gonna say. Yeah.
But it was a pretty intense moment.
Those times when people, ask, well, what proof have you got? It's like, well, it's not exactly proof, but things are made pretty clear, it's and I'm aware of kind of confirmation bias and all the rest of it, but it gets to the point after 20 plus years of those kind of things where there's too many coincidences, and it's just there's definitely something going on, and I prefer to hedge my bets with just
err on the side of caution.
Exactly.
Well,
absolutely.
We had something else. I'll tell this quickly because it's a short story. We had something else happen recently. We had a small fairy ring in my front yard. If you ever come to my house, just keep all this in mind. It's an interesting place. We had a small fairy ring in my front yard, and my daughters know anytime you see things like that to leave them alone. My son is only three and a half. So we were waiting for my 8-year-old daughter's school bus, and my son went over and kicked one of the mushrooms. And my 8-year-old immediately was like, "You don't do that. You need to apologize. You don't mess with that." She calls them fairy houses. And I called him over and I'm like, come over here. And I'm like, you don't do that. If you damage anything that belongs to the good folk, something bad might happen to you. And literally, and I'm not kidding when I say this, as soon as the words "something bad might happen to you" came out of my mouth, it was about this big, oak branch fell exactly where he'd been standing, right next to the fairy ring.
Right.
A second before I'd called him over to come talk to me, which was like 10 feet away.
Yeah.
And that actually scared me.
Yeah.
I think it was more for emphasis kind of thing, but things like that, the timing of it.
Yeah.
I mean, You can argue it was a coincidence, but
yeah, like I said, there's too many coincidences stacking up for me anyway, and I'm sure it's the same for you, you know, and it's just
yeah, I'd rather buy the cream once a week and pour it out
exactly
and not mess with stuff that's theirs.
Exactly.
And then no one has anything fall on them.
Yeah. It's all good.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about like a kind of more long term? Do you practice with anybody else, or are you solo?
For the Irish spirituality, there's really not anyone in my immediate area who has a similar interest. I have some people locally that I do practice with, but more either general witchcraft, if there is such a thing as general witchcraft. And I also have some people who are more interested in Germanic heathenry that I do some things with. But I'm kind of on my own for the Irish. I do have people online that I'm connected to, thankfully, because it was getting pretty lonely for a while.
Yeah.
And that is hard. You know, it's hard to feel like you're the only person in your area who's interested in something.
Yeah.
Spirituality wise, but yeah, so for that. And I mean, I have my children, which is nice. It's not the reason I had my children.
Oh, of course not. No.
After I said it, I'm like, that sounded a little strange, but
no, there have to be some bonuses to having children, right? There's the looking after you in your old age, and
they drive me crazy the majority of the time, but they do have their sweet moments.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yes, giving me a lot of gray hair, so they owe me a couple sweet moments. And on a seasonal basis, I skipped that part. I do acknowledge the 4 fire festivals.
Okay,
kind of my big thing. And lately, midsummer, I've been. I shouldn't say lately. Lately for me means like within the past like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
So to clarify, lately for the past 5 or 6 years, we've been honoring Anya on the midsummer.
Midsummer, yeah.
Which is sort of a newer thing for us. But the fire festivals have always been a big deal. So that's sort of my seasonal thing.
Cool. And why Anya? Where did that start, or how did it start?
I'm just trying to remember this. I think someone I'll blame the internet for everything these days. It's either the Victorians or the internet.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
Yeah. I think someone on the internet had asked if there were any Irish practices relating to the equinoxes and solstices. And there are. It's just hard to sort of dig through and figure out what they probably were historically. Because the fire festivals, we have a lot of mythic information about, and a lot of the older traditions that kind of escaped the more overt Christianization. But the solstices and the equinoxes are really complicated to try to figure out what the deal with them were. But midsummer, there's a lot that we still know was done for Manannan. I'm sure I just said that wrong, but sorry. And Anya. And there was just something about Anya as I was researching and looking into it. I just really liked the things associated with her celebrations. I love her mythology as well, I have to be honest. She's one of those that's very complicated. She was originally said to be one of the Tuatha, and then she became a fairy queen, and then was sort of eventually said to be a mortal girl. So it's got all these layers to it, which kind of appeals to me. I love complicated things.
Yeah. We are in the right spirituality for that.
Yeah, it's a good thing that I like complicated things.
Yeah, because there's nothing simple really with the resources that we have, you know.
No, definitely not.
For a straightforward family tree, eh?
And, the more I read her different mythology, the more I loved her different stories. She's supposed to be Crom's consort at Lunasa. She's got ties in with Samhain. She's celebrated at midsummer with these processions, torchlit processions that help bless the fields and not breast. I don't know where that came from. Bless the crops and cattle. And I just really loved all of it. So I don't, she's not one of the primary deities that I honor, because I've got a lot of deities already. But I do like to acknowledge her at midsummer. And I like the symbolism with her. So
cool. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that you're 1 month today away from your first trip to Ireland, and I'm very excited to be meeting you over here on our home turf. So how important is it to you personally to visit or to be in Ireland physically?
It's extremely important. I actually was supposed to go to Ireland originally when I was in high school. I think I was like 16 or 17. And the trip, for a variety of reasons, ended up falling through, so that I wasn't able to go. I was supposed to go with my best friend, the one I'd mentioned earlier, who was from Ireland. I was supposed to go with her family.
Okay.
And so it's sort of been like a mission for me for the last 20 years.
And those pesky kids get in the way, though, don't they?
Yeah. And money, which I'm sure is a common reason for a lot of people.
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm really aware as well, like a lot of people it's very important to, and as we've talked about before, it is very important to me. I mean, I've done a lot of guiding of, visitors who are coming to Ireland professionally, and so I've come across kind of all sorts who are coming to visit, and I'm just so aware of the difference that it makes when people are here. And the kind of the layers or the levels that kind of open up or expand, I suppose, rather than open up. But I'm also really, really aware of ableism or classism, because, in the presumption that, if you just, give up those coffees that you're buying in Starbucks every day and save, then you can, you can make it to Ireland, which is, okay, that might be relevant for a certain sector of, American society or international society, but it's not for everybody, and there are people who couldn't afford those coffees in Starbucks once a month, never mind every day. And, it's just something that I'm very aware of. And, again, we've talked about money issues, and we share a lot of common ground for responsibilities, I think, for, not being able to do exactly what we want when we want because of the responsibilities that we've signed on to as parents, so there's a lot tied up in this for me as well as for you, I'm sure.
No, and I totally agree with that. And in all honesty, if I wasn't in the exact situation I'm in, with the trip I'm taking, which is that I'm going to facilitate a tour. I'm going to be doing some workshops and basically helping, not as a guide, because I obviously haven't been there before. That'd be a little awkward. I don't know where I am or where I'm going, but
I get what you mean.
But I'm going to facilitate as someone who knows a few things about the Mórrígan and her mythology, and to facilitate rituals and those sorts of things. Which, on the one hand, there's a whole separate issue about people coming into Ireland to do things like that. But on the other hand, I wouldn't be able to afford the trip at all if I wasn't going in that capacity. So it's a very complicated,
I could definitely see
all around.
No, but I can definitely see the value that you're going to add to that trip. And there, I think that the problem would be and I've seen this many, many times, and I don't think that's the case with the group that you're coming with, Particularly, I'm just going to plug here, Vivian of Lancie Sky Travel is just
Vivian's
absolutely
awesome.
amazing. She is amazing. And I've worked with her for years. And, you know, so I know that that's not going to be the case with your group. But what I have seen time and time again is people coming in and replacing native kind of wisdom or guidance with, you know, people that they're bringing over to do what you're doing, but it's being done instead of rather than as a complement to, which is I think what's happening with your group. And I think that there's a good balance there, because for a group of, you know, largely Americans coming over on that kind of a pilgrimage, it does help having somebody from home who is facilitating in that way, because it's energies that they're used to. It's, you know, like energetically, Ireland can be really big and scary to a lot of people coming over. You know, it can be overwhelming. And I've seen that a lot. And it does help having somebody who can mediate or facilitate, who has a familiar energy. But like I said, I think the danger comes if you're coming in and you're not respecting or supporting what's happening here. You know, the native wisdom, if you like, for want of a better description. And I know I'm kind of classing myself in that, but because I am, you know, doing that on your particular tour. But not just me, obviously. I mean, there's so much here, and one of the problems that we have in Ireland is that we don't value ourselves, and we don't see the value in what we have and what we do. Which is something I know, you know, personally I've had to climb over huge walls about, and about seeing kind of what I can offer to people as valuable. Now, obviously, working professionally as a tour guide has helped me with that, but I don't think without that, I don't think that I would be able to be in a position to do what I'm doing now, the work I'm doing now. But there are a lot of people here who don't see that and don't value what they have, and it's fantastic. And it's one of the things that Vivian is excellent at. She gets to know everybody and really kind of supports and includes and respects the local resources, you know, whether that's a bus driver or a guide or a restaurant or, you know, a hotel that's Irish owned rather than some foreign conglomerate kind of thing, you know. So when that's done right, it's amazing, and there's absolutely no reason why. And actually, I think that there's a very good reason for including expertise like yourself can offer on that kind of a group tour, as long as it's kind of in that balance of respecting what's here as well, you know?
Yeah, well, no, and Vivian is amazing. And I know she tries very hard to do everything that you just said, you know, to make sure it's genuine and that it includes people who actually know what they're doing over there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is important. You know, and like including you when we go to the cave. Yay. I'm excited about that part.
Me too.
You know, and there's other places that we're going that she's gonna do similar things where we have like on Samhain, we're going to be guests at another ritual. And that's the context we're going in. It's not our ritual. We're not doing it.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
we are
getting. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. I'm also very excited about that.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, but it's in that context. It's not us going in. It's on our tour, but it's not us doing it.
Yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we'll be participating in it, but it's us being part of something in Ireland that's Irish. It's not us just going in as Americans being like, you know,
yay, we should do this. Yeah.
You know, and I think that was important to all of us, that we make it something that's organic and not just us going in and trying to impose ourselves on the landscape, if that makes sense.
It really does. And it's you know, again, that kind of negative side of things is something that has happened all too often, you know. And I mean, you see it online, but it's kind of harder to swallow when it's right here, you know, people right in front of you who have come all that way. Like that's actually a kick in the pants for me, is that these people have, you know, put away their coffee money from Starbucks every day, maybe, or, you know, whatever it's taken to actually get there. And all they're doing is recreating their American experience here, you know, without actually being open to what is here natively, or you know, what they could be accessing or could be joining in with, which is just a shame all around, besides being fucking annoying from our perspective, you know.
Yeah.
Like a real shame for them, because they're missing out, you know, and they're not going to get to experience and join in with what is, you know, well, obviously can be, not always, but can be a very profound experience for them and very different to anything that they've had before, you know. So that's kind of cool when that happens, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing you guys in a month's time.
I'm excited too.
Yeah. Well, actually, it's a month from now. We're on the 22nd of September now.
Yes.
So I don't know when this will go out. I'm still trying to put this as kind of for the podcast. So, but I haven't got the podcast set up yet. So maybe in a month. But you're going with Stephanie Woodfield as well, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what's if people want to kind of look at maybe future tours? I know that it'll be too late for this one, obviously, because it's booked up. But
we have one we're planning to do at Bialchina 2018.
Cool.
That's actually, I'm just gonna say super excited now. That's my new word. I went from Florida to super excited with like jazz hands.
Yeah. Awesome.
That one, I may have convinced Vivian and Stephanie. Strong-armed might be a excessive term, but that one's actually going to be in the south, cool. Southern Ireland, which I might be a little biased in favor of. But
yeah, Vivian was asking me. So that's like Kerry and Cork and Waterford, maybe.
I'm hoping. We haven't finalized it because it's obviously a bit of a ways out at this point. But you know, there's so many sacred sites down there, and there's so much association with deities who I think don't get enough attention.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to be biased, I might as well just go all the way.
Yeah.
There you go. And you know, Cork, I don't think gets enough attention with sacred site tours in particular, and Kerry and Waterford, and basically that whole area. And there's so much down there. You know, everyone tends to focus on the middle and the north and the west. Not that those are not awesome places.
Yeah.
Because they are.
Yeah.
You know, but there's so much else.
Yeah. There's the anything within kind of easy driving range of Dublin. So you've got your Tara and all those kind of ones, which are obviously they're important, you know, Tara and Newgrange, but you know, Tara and Newgrange.
Well, you do have some of the more significant mythology around those places, and you know, the things people are more familiar with, I think offhand tend to be around there, which I do understand.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be really exciting and fun to get into the south and talk about, I'm trying to think, the kayak, of course.
Yeah.
Because that's kind of her big area down there.
Beara Peninsula down there, yeah.
Yep. And of course my mind goes blank as I try to say this. Never fails.
That's okay. Well, where do people need to be looking? Is there a website for that, or
Lancie Sky Travel,
cool.
Vivian's Facebook for that would be the place to go. I don't think we have any really official. Well,
I know Vivian has a mailing list, so it's worth them if anybody's kind of even considering putting their Starbucks money away. I'm just going to use that as a joke forever from now on, but
it's a good joke to go with.
Yeah. So if you're even considering, you know, maybe trying to put some funds together, or you know, booking a tour, or whatever your position might be, it's or you know, if you just want to have some wishful thinking and start throwing some energy towards, you know, maybe I could get to Ireland someday. Definitely joining the mailing list.
I might be wrong because I only have so much brain, and I focus a lot of it on translation and writing and then children. There's only a little bit left over, but I believe we're actually going to do for the 2018 Sacred Sites Tour in Ireland. I think we're actually going to do and see, I've completely lost my ability to speak now. We're going to offer it to someone who can't afford to go.
Okay.
So if someone
scholarship position, or
yes, that would be the word.
Okay.
I have too many other languages in my brain. Every now and then I forget English
understandable.
words. There you go. Scholarship would be the word. I believe we were discussing offering a scholarship position to someone who genuinely can't afford it.
Yeah.
So like if you could afford it, you just don't want to.
Yeah. No, that's not cool. That's not cool.
Yeah. It's not a win a free trip kind of thing. It's,
yeah.
You know, if you legitimately can't afford to go, but you really want to, type of thing. Yeah. So
that's cool. And I actually really appreciate that personally. As you know, I offer when I'm teaching online or in person, actually, I would offer a certain amount of scholarship places. I have to be quite careful because, again, that kind of, you know, me not valuing myself, I kind of want to just give everybody who applies a scholarship place, and I've been kind of smacked down by my deity for that, because I have to start valuing what I have to offer. But yeah, it's really important for me as a priestess to be able to give that kind of community service with no funds attached, or, you know, no barrier to entry, so that somebody who genuinely needs that place, or, you know, whatever. And I've been kind of known to, you know, hand out free copies of my books and stuff like that for anybody who asks. So
yeah,
you know, it's just when we're doing this kind of work, I feel it is important to have those kind of options available, you know, if possible, because you know, and okay, so everybody else might on that kind of trip, maybe other people kind of have to pay a little bit extra to maybe carry, you know, take up the slack, but it means that you guys aren't getting profit from that one person. And I think that kind of balance is really important, not just for the people getting the profit at the end of it. And obviously, if you do the work, you deserve to get the profit, and I have no problem with that for other people. I only seem to apply that to myself, you know. But yeah, like it's important that everybody maybe on the trip contributes a tiny bit, so that somebody else who wouldn't be able to be there originally. Now I don't know what structure you have or what way so this is just me talking off the top of my head, obviously, but yes, I very much approve of that, for whatever that's worth. Not that you need my approval, but you know, it's really important for me to have that kind of balance while we're doing this work, you know.
No, I thought it was a wonderful thing. I mean, I obviously, as I had mentioned before, I wouldn't be able to go at all if I wasn't one of the people who was co-facilitating it.
Working, yeah.
Yeah.
And you will work. I mean, I don't know.
But I expect to.
Yeah. Don't let, I know you do, but don't let anybody think that you're going to be getting some kind of free ride, because you know, I know from traveling and teaching myself, and also from, you know, witnessing people who are coming over with these groups, you know, it's you don't know, let's be diplomatic about this, you don't always have kind of control over the people that you're going to be spending the time with. So there could be kind of anybody on the trip or in the group, and you just have to be professional and deal with them, you know, regardless. And you're stuck on a bus with them, or stuck in a hotel with them, or, you know, stuck in a very small cave with them, while you're, you know, you're not always free to have the experience, obviously, that you would be having if you were just here kind of as an attendee. But it is hard work, because you're taking responsibility then as a facilitator and as a teacher and as a guide, you know. I mean, you might not be a guide to Ireland, but you're still a guide to your particular expertise, you know, and you're sharing that expertise with those people, and you fucking work for it like you do, you know. And I would hate for anybody to think that you or anybody in that position was getting some kind of free ride because they get to, you know, oh look, she gets to travel, and isn't it great, and isn't it well for her, and all that kind of, maybe that's just an Irish kind of begrudgery thing that we have going on here, but yeah, it's something that I have come across. And
yeah, no, I think that's a lot of people just assume. I think a lot of people assume in general when you teach workshops or when you lead rituals, that it's just, you show up and then you talk for an hour and you're done.
Yeah.
And it's all just like, bonbons and a great time.
Yeah.
And
Drinks in the bar after. Oh.
right. And it's, even my husband, bless him, because I love him, but when I do the Mórrígan's Call retreat every year, this was our third year, and there's nothing I can say that will convince this man that it is not like a 4-day vacation where I just go and lounge in a cabin and hang out with my friends.
Yeah.
And it's not. I mean, it's constant. I have very little time to, and I mean, some of that is on me because I always volunteer to do like 20 workshops because I'm crazy. But, between all the different rituals and the workshops and, this Ireland tour next month, which I'm super excited about, but there's rituals almost every day, even if they're smaller. There's workshops almost every day. I, in my personal madness, volunteered to recite the Morgan's Peace Prophecy in Old Irish at Tara when we go there.
Okay.
I'm super excited to do.
Yes. Yeah.
But, I do have social anxiety. So then I think about that and I start to get very nervous. And, so there's going to be no part of that 9 days, as fabulous as it will be, where I'm not going to be constantly on the go and working. So
no, totally hear you on that one. And I mean, we shared a cabin obviously at the Mórrígan's Call retreat, as you may remember me from such events.
I think I saw you in passing a couple times.
But I found that really, I mean, I've been to events in America before, obviously, but I had kind of escape space. Now, our cabin was very much escape space, which was great. But we didn't spend a lot of time in it, and in that kind of, that closed environment, for introverts like us, with maybe those social anxiety issues and not kind of being in our comfort zone, the energy that you have to expand to not just the teaching. I mean, the teaching is one thing, but just the actual physical going around and socializing and being on all the time, kind of being stopped by somebody on your way to the jacks, like to the toilet, So, how many times did that happen to you? Because I know, like, it was so many times when I nearly peed in my pants because, I was talking to so many people just trying to get to the toilet.
Yes.
And that's kind of, we're going on these trips and, you going to Ireland or me going to America, but it is work, and that's okay, because that's what we're signed up to. I'm not, please don't think I'm complaining about that, because obviously I'm not.
But you make a good point, like, as for people who are more introverted, and I am an introvert. I am that person who, when I went to Pantheacon a couple years ago, I loved the experience, but I was the one who was hanging out in the hotel room for hours by myself. While everyone else was like having a great time in the main hotel, I was like hiding, reading, watching TV, because I'm like, I can't take all these people. It's too many people.
Too much.
So, being more introverted and being on tours or being at retreats where it's just people all the time, it takes a lot out of you.
Yeah, it really does.
So.
Okay.
But we manage.
We do. And, I think you're probably the same as me. I feel honored to be able to do that and to be able to provide those services for the community, so that's cool too.
If I didn't think it had some value to do it, then I would not make myself do it, because it's so high stress for me. That,
No, absolutely. I hear you on that one.
I have to think it helps somehow. Somebody somewhere.
Okay, so I'm actually just looking at Facebook. I put up just before our thing, I don't know if you've seen it, but just before our interview, I put up just asking if anybody had any questions. So I'm just going to jump right in with that here, because I have my phone.
I'm looking at your horrifying question on the screen, so I'll just talk over that. It may be French.
Okay, so we can park that one for a second and just shift our focus here. So Vivian Armstrong, who we've just been talking about, she says, I have a question for Morgan.
All good.
Yeah, all good. I have a question for Morgan. I think she's pretty and I'm glad she's my friend.
That's not a question, Vivian.
Not a question. Okay, fair enough. Okay, so John actually has a good question. He says, how challenging was it to learn not just Irish, but ancient Irish? So how challenging did you find that?
That is a good question. My modern Irish is what I like to call toddler Irish. I actually understand a little more than I speak when I hear. I can read it. My accent is horrible. I call it a Franken accent because I'm self-taught, so I've learned like all the different dialects kind of smushed together, and it's bad. I admit it's bad. But as they say, broken Irish is better than clever English. So, at least I have some. Old Irish, though, I have to admit, I have a real passion for it. I'm actually severely dyslexic, and for whatever reason, my brain really likes Old Irish.
Okay.
Old Irish is a non-standard orthography, which means that they were very loose with how they spelled everything.
Yeah.
Which most people hate with a passion. Because, vowels, I mean, whatever, just use whichever one you feel like.
Yeah.
Consonants, a D, a T, they're kind of the same.
Swap them around. They kind of sound the same. It's all good,
And a lot of people don't like Old Irish for that reason, because it's very non-standard, and you have multiple versions of a word that are equally correct, but are very different. And for whatever reason, my brain loves it. I have had an easier time learning Old Irish than I think any other language that I've ever learned. I don't know that I speak it any better than modern Irish, because it's a reconstructed spoken language. Like no one actually knows what it sounded like.
Yeah.
Just to be honest. And a lot of times the scribes that were writing it down, they just sort of assumed if you had the education to be reading it, you just knew what needed to be eclipsed, what needed delineation. So they just wouldn't include that. If you have the education to read this, then clearly you know that there should be an H following that C.
Yeah.
So, like I mentioned earlier, I love complicated things, and I also like puzzles. So, I do really just enjoy the complexity of it. I've found that it just appeals to me. I will say though, because some people don't seem to grasp this very well, if you're interested in Irish, I highly recommend that you learn to speak Irish. It is a beautiful language. Everyone in the world should speak it. It should be the language of the entire planet. But that aside, modern Irish and Old Irish are not the same language. It's like modern English and Old English.
Yeah.
I think like Chaucer.
Yeah.
I will not start reciting Chaucer for you, although don't make me. But it actually is profoundly different. It's not just that it's like a little bit, like you can look at a word and, okay. In some cases, there are some words that are still fairly similar, like the word for fool, which is a wonderful word. Everyone should know. It's very useful. But the Old Irish is still fairly similar. Like if you look at it, you'd probably recognize it.
Yeah. So it was Amadan as well, was it?
Yeah, they spell it a little differently.
Okay.
I think it has 2 M's and they use a T instead of a D.
Okay.
I believe. But it's similar enough.
Yeah.
But the vast majority of it is pretty different.
Yeah.
A lot of the words are different enough that you really have to approach it as if it's a completely separate language.
Yeah.
you're not going to be able, if you speak modern Irish, to look at Old Irish and be able to understand a lot of it.
No, I can't. Yeah. Yeah.
Because that was one thing I figured out fairly quickly when I started trying to learn it. It's like, oh, this is not, one doesn't lend itself to the other.
No, these are not the same things.
No. I will say, though, if you're really interested in Irish mythology and you want to understand the myths, I do recommend learning Old Irish if you have a ability for languages, because it's not an easy thing to learn necessarily, but the majority of translations that are out there are crap. I know you've heard this before from me, Laura.
Let me just take this time to thank you for your translations, which have, I mean, yourself and Isolde Carmody, basically.
I love story archaeology.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think I would have like torn my hair out years ago, because I've been looking at these translations for years, knowing in my heart and soul that this was not right, that there was gaps. I could feel the gaps. I could actually like trace with my fingers almost where the gaps were.
Yep.
I don't have a propensity for languages, and you know, I speak Irish and English, and even my Irish isn't great. So, you know, plus I had kids very early, and there's a whole slew of reasons why I have not done what you've done. But I absolutely do appreciate your translations, and your translation work is, it's gold dust as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It means a lot to me. I actually started doing it kind of for the same reason. I realized when I was reading the first battle of Moytura, the Cath Moytura, that there's big sections of it that the translators were just like, nope.
Yeah.
Not going to do it, which I understand now why. And there are legitimate reasons why, you know, even better translators like Elizabeth Gray were just like, no, I'm not touching that.
Yeah.
But at the time I was frustrated because I'm like, I want to know what this says. And then I started sort of slowly learning some basic Old Irish, if there is such a thing as basic Old Irish. I've developed a passionate hatred of Whitley Stokes.
Yeah.
Passionate hatred.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, a lot of the translations that are out there and that people use are from Stokes. And he was a Victorian.
Yeah.
He was translating during the Victorian period. So a lot of his stuff is from that filter, which matters a lot. And he was a jerk, man. He would change stuff for no reason that I can see, except that he felt that it made more sense or sounded better.
Yeah.
A different way.
Yeah. And it is so frustrating because, you know, a lot of the time, as you say, that is the most commonly available translations, and sometimes there just isn't any alternatives. And I know over the last couple of years since I got to know you, I have often, I would say, thrown something your way with, you know, please, can you help me with this? Because I know it's wrong.
Which I like. I mean, I enjoy doing translations. It's how I relax. I joke that I have weird hobbies because that's what I do for fun.
Awesome. So I do not have to feel too guilty about all the work I've thrown your way.
No, don't feel guilty. Sometimes it takes me a little time to get to it, but I enjoy doing it.
No pressure, and always appreciate it.
Definitely.
And then there was the time where, you know, we were doing a class, and in the 10 minutes when other people were doing journeying work, and you couldn't access that.
My son with me.
Yeah. You went off and did a translation, and you know, by the end of the class that I was teaching, all of a sudden we had access to Morgan's translation. It was amazing.
Yep. And that was important because, again, that was a case where the existing translation was crap.
Yeah.
And
and again, always appreciate it. It's like, you know, you're fucking superwoman as far as I'm concerned. And actually, you know, I'm just looking at John's questions here. John is my partner, by the way, John O'Sullivan. And that's that John. And he says at the end of his questions, he says, also, you rock, Morgan. Laura gets very excited by your work, which I think we've just seen. case in point. But he does have another.
That's true in reverse too. I get very excited by Laura's work. So. And John's stories.
Yes, John's stories.
I like that one he just posted this morning about the
darkness.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah. So you can check out On Scaly Bug, and John's Dagda tales are pretty amazing.
They are.
But he has another question. What was your most inspiring moment when working through the old tales? So how do you pick just one, John? Thank you, John. But is there anything that's coming to mind? Most inspiring moment?
I gotta think.
Yeah.
That's tough. I do like doing a lot of them just in general.
What's
my favorite? Probably the Twin Bovagamna is my all-time favorite. Yeah. I don't know if that would be my most inspiring. That's just kind of my favorite story.
Yeah, I don't know. I find that one pretty inspiring. I have to say,
it is pretty inspiring.
Yeah,
but
I think there's a lot in that story that is, again, it's one of those ones where I was looking at it now. Your translation was a godsend, but even down to the way her name was being translated and that kind of thing, where it wasn't making sense. And even with the translation that we have, it feels like there's a lot more going on there than than we can see from the story that we have. And I think that there's definitely gaps there that were either a given to the audience at the time, maybe that they didn't have to be explained. And similar to that, what you were saying about the Old Irish, where it's like, if you're kind of educated enough or if you're, in the zone to be hearing these stories, then, all the rest of it, and we don't have to kind of spell all this out for you. So
yeah, you just understand it.
Exactly, yeah.
It actually reminds me of something, but I'm not going to remember it well enough to say it now. But I know there's something in her name about the small-mouthed.
Yeah, small-mouthed, yeah.
That actually does relate to something, but I'm trying to remember what exactly it is. It has to do with a type of cursing, I think, relating to death. Okay. I'll look it up when I have a second, and I'll message you.
Cool.
I probably my most inspiring wouldn't be a specific thing, but I know that when I do some of the shorter translations, you get into this sort of zone with it where you're looking up the little pieces of things, and it just keeps, it's like a rabbit hole. You fall into it. One little piece of something will lead you to all of these other contextual things. I had posted on Facebook the other day that one of my new favorite terms is Iarcbrun in Old Irish, which means badger horns. And it's just a term for something that doesn't exist, something imaginary.
Yeah.
So I was joking that I'll be referring to my free time as that from now on. Badger horns.
And Iarc would be sight, I think, as in a, or is that Rark?
Yeah, and in Old Irish, it's
Irish.
The plural for horns.
Yeah. Interesting. Sorry, that's again different languages.
yeah. Well, and it's funny sometimes the way that some things evolved and stayed fairly similar, like the word for blessing. It's pretty much the same. You just spell it a little bit differently. Banach.
And the plural then, Banachti, would that be the same, or is it pluralized differently?
Yeah, no, it's the same. Banachti. A lot of what makes it harder, the old languages, there's certain words that don't exist anymore. They're just archaic words, which Old English is the same way. And they pretty much conjugated everything.
Right.
If it would hold still, they conjugated it. Adjectives, prepositions, verbs, nouns, just conjugate it all.
Okay.
We'll be super, super clear on exactly what we're talking about. And just get all of it. So that makes it fun when you're translating things, because it gets so redundant sometimes.
Yeah.
Just like, okay, well, they clearly wanted to be really, really definitive. about exactly what they were talking about. I just lost that. Modern Irish is not that
No,
anymore, which is a
no.
good thing.
Thankfully,
Yeah.
because I don't think I would have survived school if that was the case.
No, I actually have a friend who went to college and he has a degree in Sanskrit
Right.
because I have interesting friends.
Yeah.
And he and I were hanging out the other day and we had a whole conversation about the joys of translating, dead languages, basically ancient languages, because Sanskrit's very similar.
Yeah.
I guess that was just a thing, thousands of years ago.
Conjugation, just
Yeah,
all conjugation.
yeah, and
Okay.
like having multiple words for the exact same thing.
Yeah, that's always fun.
Yep.
Yeah. And then with the translations, I found just by following along, obviously not by doing it, but if you choose, whichever one you choose, kind of say at the start of the sentence, if you have a couple of options, it does change the context then of the entire sentence. So you can have a kind of I've often thought like with the bad translations that there might be this kind of domino effect of if you just choose the wrong one at the start, then it kind of has a knock-on effect through the rest of the sentence or even the story. For like a lot can hinge on just that kind of that one word and what you're
Yep.
choosing.
Yep. Well, and Old Irish, and all languages really, it's not just Old Irish, but most languages are very idiomatic. It's not literal. Like, of course, every time I try to think of examples of anything, my mind goes blank. But in German, I'll use this because this example I can think of. When you wish someone good luck, you say Schwein gehabt, which means have a pig.
Okay.
You're not actually saying have a literal pig.
Yeah.
It's just an idiomatic expression. But if you don't understand that and you're translating it literally, it makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
And you'll see a lot of things like the badger horns, for example. If you read that in a text and someone translates it literally,
Yeah.
you're going to be reading it like, what are they talking about?
Where did the badgers come from?
Right, why do they have horns?
Yeah.
Are they demonic badgers?
Yes.
What's going on?
Was there, some kind of horned badger back in the day in ancient Ireland,
Right, you never know. I mean,
that's one of the reasons that I like Douglas Hyde stories, because he grew up speaking the language. So, he was obviously very careful about the language and his kind of interpretation of it and all the rest of it, but he understood it, so he didn't have to rely on intermediary guides, which a lot of the Victorians would have had to do, where it's like they didn't speak the language, so they had to get some local person who was going to translate something. So if they gave it, and it depends on the local person that they asked. So if it was somebody who maybe knew the context of what they were talking about, they'd give them, they wouldn't give them badger horns, they'd give them the what it actually means, when somebody would say that. But if you just ask somebody out of context, what does this mean? And they give it to you, then it's like, okay, and you just kind of have to take that at face value then and run with it. Whereas Douglas Hyde's translations, you can really see that there's much more of a flow to the stories, and the turn of phrase, like it's all odd as fuck. Like it doesn't get, the Irish stories are all odd. I think one of my favorite ones is the Alp Luachra, the little newt thing that climbs into your belly, and kind of, but but he grew up immersed in that culture, and even though he wasn't kind of, I don't know if he was born in Ireland or if they moved here, but his family was kind of English rector kind of ministers or something like that. So they weren't part of the local populace. They were the academic kind of. He had that class and that distinction. But I mean, he grew up running around with his dad's. I want to say servant. He wasn't a servant. He was like the gameskeeper or the groundskeeper or something like that. Seamus. But who was a local Roscommon guy, and taught him the language and took him to meet the old people. And, so I love Douglas Hyde's translations for that reason, because he has that grasp, and he has the academic side of things obviously down pat, because he was super intelligent and, studied a lot. But he has the grasp of it, and the cultural grasp, and the expression, the expression of it is true to the meaning rather than the literal translations. So
Right. It's not getting lost in translation.
exactly. And I think, I mean, I don't really know a lot of other languages, but Irish particularly is quite lyrical and poetic in our expression, you know, and we do have a very, I mean, I know you get it in a lot of languages, but I've heard from people who study a lot of languages that Irish in particular has a very poetic and colourful turn of phrase in the way it's used, in the way it's spoken. Now, this is modern Irish, obviously. So, and I think we do have, you know, we are a poetic people, we're storytellers, and we always have been. So, so that just kind of makes it that little bit more difficult if you're looking for literal translations, I think, you know, and if you don't have that spirit, if you don't have that essential kind of understanding of how people talk and how people express themselves rather than just what they're literally saying, then, you know, you're going to be, as you say, lost in translation.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I wonder how many of those bad translations, that's why they happened, because translators were just hit a point where they were like, I don't even know what this is supposed to mean.
Yeah.
So, you know, we'll just say it's this.
Yeah, these people are crazy, and I just, you know, it's 4:00 on a Friday, and you know, I need to. I'm close to going out here, so you know.
Well, like, and there's a point in the Táin Bóra where, after the Mórrígan gives him her name, and I'm not going to remember the Irish offhand, but what Cuchulainn's response to her is, it's an idiomatic expression, but it basically he accuses them of making fun of him, of trying to make a fool of him. That's not the literal, the word for word. If you don't understand the idiom, it doesn't make any sense. But it's, you know, the meaning of it is basically like you're taking the piss, you know, effectively, like, you know. And that's when he gets mad and jumps on her and puts a spear to her head and is like, you know.
What was your first mistake? Well, okay, let's not get off on a Cuchulainn thing, because that's
a whole other podcast.
Absolutely. So just the last question that was on the Facebook here, Bronwyn says, what is something that you feel or have experienced as missing from the widely read translations of the mythical cycles? So, okay, talk about rabbit holes. Top of your head, first thing that's coming to mind.
What is something that I feel that is missing from the widely read translations?
Like from a general kind of understanding of it, I suppose.
That's a complicated question.
I know.
I think the way I would probably answer that question is, I think the biggest problem right now is that the majority of the translations that people are reading are not even the translations. It seems to me that what most people are reading for the mythology is a website that's paraphrasing a 20th century retelling of a 19th century translation of the text, the original text. And so it's like the game of telephone, where you're
Chinese whispers,
right. Like, there's actually a fairly popular website I know of, She Air, I think it's called.
She Air.
I see you rolling your eyes. Yes, I agree with you. And I had been trying for the longest time to figure out why so many people were convinced that the Mórrígan loved Cuchulainn, and I'm not going to go off on all that, but I honestly was a little perplexed by why everyone kept saying she had offered him her love and he'd rejected her, because even if you read the translations that are out there of that particular instance in the Táin Bócúlaí, it really doesn't even read that way. She just kind of shows up and says, here's my stuff and here's me, and I kind of love you because I think you've done some cool stuff. And he's like, it's not the greatest time. right now. And then she says, I can help you. And then he says, I'm not here.
That's where she's the daughter of Buan.
King Buan, yeah.
Yeah.
But no matter how you read that,
Mm-hmm.
Love is never mentioned in any of that.
Yeah.
A woman's backside is, which entertains me endlessly. But all that aside, but then come to find out, I did a little sleuthing, and this very popular website, which a lot of people constantly share links to and get their information from.
Yeah.
If you click on their version, they sort of mashed the Twin Bodagamna and Twin Bokuli sort of together, and they actually, in their paraphrased telephone retelling, have her showing up driving a cow, and telling Cuchulainn that she loves him and that she wants to be with him, and he says no, and then she turns into a blackbird on a tree and threatens him, which at least now I understand why so many people are acting like this is an actual thing.
That's not good.
And that completely never happens anywhere in actual mythology. Ever. Just so everyone watching this knows, never.
So the gaps are with the rehashed, not even bad translations, but rehashed versions of bad translations.
Right. So you start with the bad translation, which is problematic anyway. Whitley Stokes with his whole, the Mórrígan is washing herself, which is not what it says. It specifically says she's washing her genitals. She didn't like the genitals word. So there's that part, and then he calls her a lamia, which the text never uses that word. So that's problematic. So then you have that bad translation. Then you have people like Gray, or Gregory, I should say. Gray's better.
Gray's okay.
You have Lady Gregory. You have Lady Gregory who then takes the Stokes version and makes her version, which is even wackier. Right.
Whitewashed and sanitized. Right.
And they should just be having little tea cups and scones. And then you have someone take that and then make an even weirder
website version of it.
Right. And then people are reading that and thinking, but this is the actual mythology, and it's like, no. And now we're so far from what the actual old Irish said to begin with.
So
you have the answer to that question.
You have a blog. Let me just point that out. You have a blog, but you also have 2 books. I think 2 now at this point.
For the translations.
For the translations. And I highly recommend anybody who wants to avoid all that shit show to go back and read Morgan's translations. And the other resource would be Story Archaeology. So storyarchaeology.com, and their take on things is kind of cool too. So so both of those are good resources. Avoid the bad resources. So I suppose we've actually gone way longer than our half an hour, kind of. So we should probably move through these questions, which I'm not complaining about because you're awesome and I love chatting to you, and I'm sure that there'll be a lot of value for people watching. But we probably should try and get these questions finished.
Watching the time. Oops.
If you could make every person beginning this path read just one book, what would it be? And you're allowed to say your own, by the way. Just
that's so hard though, because I honestly don't think there's any one book.
Okay, well, if they could only have one on a desert island, what would it be? On the spot.
No, the desert island. If I could make every person beginning this path, if they had to have just one book, I would probably say for just Irish spirituality, practical purposes, it would be a toss-up, because I'm not going to give you one, I refuse. Between your practical guide, I'm probably going to mess up the title because I don't have it in front of me, to Irish spirituality. It's right over there, but I can't read the title.
You got it right. Practical Guide to Irish Spirituality. It's a workbook, so that's important.
Well, I like because it touches on all of the major important things. And I say I couldn't give just one book because I do think that people should also read the mythology.
Yeah.
In case no one has caught on to that.
Yeah, I'm going to recommend then your 2 books of translations as well.
Okay.
As maybe,
they're little, they're pocket books, so we'll sneak them in.
But it is important. So did you have another one? Sorry, I talked over you there.
Well, no, I was going to say, I think that, not to end on a critical note, but I think the mistake a lot of people make is not reading the mythology. And I think particularly in America, although I have run into several people in Ireland, not literally, but online, who have also not read the mythology. So I'm not just going to criticize Americans for this one, but
absolutely.
I think if you don't have that grounding in the mythology and the folklore, it's very hard to practice the spirituality and really understand the roots of it.
Yeah.
You can understand what you're doing, but you're not going to understand what you're doing it to.
Yeah. Well, I very much feel that our spirituality is in our stories. I mean, that's our lore. That's our Bible, for want of a better description, is our stories, our mythology, there's so many stories where you can clearly see that they were teaching tales specifically. Whether that was a kind of a moral question or a practical question, that there was specific lessons that were being taught by the telling of these tales. And that, I think, goes for all of the stories, whether it's history being taught or, practical magic or whatever was actually being taught, it was done through the stories. And I think that's backed up with the fact that, we were an oral tradition, we were an oral culture. And the way as far as we know, the way things like, Druidcraft and that was taught. So I think you're absolutely spot on that every practice of Irish spirituality has to start with the stories, and when you read the stories, and particularly in your fine translations, you get a real sense of the language, even if you're reading them in English, you get a sense of the language, you get a sense of the flow, you get kind of an insight into the, the mind of the Irish, if you like, because, and I think, everybody's probably heard me go on about how it is important to at least make an effort with the language if you're going to be practicing Irish spirituality. And that gets me in a lot of trouble with a lot of people who, see that as a really negative thing, and it's too hard, and for all those reasons. And I know that some people don't have that, but you can learn a few words, you can learn how to pronounce a few words, you can learn how to pronounce the words that you're using, you can learn how to pronounce them as they are being pronounced. If anybody ever says Sam Hain to me again, they're actually going to get a physical slap if they're in front of me.
That's something I go on about every year.
Yeah.
And that's
and by reading the stories, you get an insight into that kind of the brain patterns, I suppose, and how
and
that's works.
That's exactly the thing. And when people, because we get even more resistance to it over here, I'm sure you can imagine, because people don't want to learn another language, and particularly Irish, if they're Irish pagans in America. But the reality of it is, whatever your personal opinion on it is, it's just psychology. I do have a psychology degree. I should probably say that before I start ranting about this.
That's right.
It's something called the Worf-Sapir hypothesis, which basically it's language affects our understanding of reality. It affects how our brain processes information, because it's what we use to understand what's going on around us. And they've shown that different cultures, the language that they use, it really does shape the culture, and the people in it, the language that they speak, affects that culture. To really understand the culture, you have to have some knowledge of that language. And that's not different for Irish just because modern Ireland is a primarily English-speaking country.
Yeah.
You know, it's still, even Irish spoken, I'm messing this up, even English spoken by the Irish is a different speech pattern.
Hello? I think I lost you there for a minute.
It says my internet connection is unstable, and I'm like, and I'm in the middle of a glorious rant here. Come on. But you know, even people who are speaking English coming from an Irish background have a different way of speaking.
Yeah.
And that's important. It's not just, you know, cute or whatever stupid thing.
Quaint is the usual one. Yeah.
Don't get me started. That is significant. It's the culture. And the Irish language, and looking at the Old Irish as well, speaking it and understanding it gives you significant insight into the culture itself that you just don't have. And I'm saying that as someone who, you know, not just as an English speaker being like, ooh, go learn language, but when you learn the language, you do get that understanding of, okay, this actually is a different way of understanding the world and looking at things. Yeah,
it's how our brains work, and
exactly.
Yeah,
it's how our brains process reality.
Exactly. And I think that's a whole other podcast as well, is what's real and what's not.
Wow.
Maybe you need to talk psychology sometime. That's an interesting conversation.
It is. We should just do a whole series of these.
Yeah.
We could probably fill hours and hours.
I think yes, I think we probably could. Okay, so we do have one more question, I think. Okay. I can just make my tech work. Yeah. So
let's not end on a language rant.
No. Okay, so what advice do you wish someone had given you that you would like to give people starting out on this path?
That's a good one. I think probably, I don't know that anyone giving me advice when I started out would have done any good, because I was
That's a fair point.
Yeah. I was like 11. You can't tell. I have a 13-year-old right now, and it's become abundantly clear to me that you cannot tell that age group anything.
Okay. But if it was somebody who was in like a role model, you know, I'm hanging on your every word, say, you know, what advice would you give?
Probably read everything except for certain authors. You know, I have biases, but I own my bias.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not ashamed of them.
They're pretty grounded in reality from what I've heard.
Yeah. But I think, you know, generally the advice that I tend to give people who are just starting out is critical thinking is a wonderful thing.
Question everything. Why is your new favorite thing?
Yes. Critical thinking. Question everything, question me. You know, if I tell you something, don't assume that I'm right either. Look it up.
Yep.
I just posted something on Facebook yesterday about the meaning of the Mórrígan's name, because there's some new daft thing going around about that. And, you know, everything I said, you can fact check. I encourage it.
Yeah.
If you aren't sure about my translations, then learn Old Irish yourself. Do your own. I highly encourage that. Because, you know, you should never take anyone as an unquestionable authority.
Absolutely.
I think is my big advice. Like, question everything, and except maybe don't question yourself so much. I think I did way too much of that. When I was first starting out. So
well, that's kind of, I suppose that's, you know, for anxious teens like maybe we were. That's very good advice for arrogant, you know, middle class, middle age, you know, well-to-do people.
They need different
they
advice.
Need to maybe question themselves a lot more, you know. But yeah, absolutely. And I think that's fucking excellent advice, to be honest. And I wish somebody had given that to me when I was starting out. Um, because questioning everything is so important. And, even your own experiences. I mean, okay, as teens, yeah, we questioned ourselves way too much and we didn't trust ourselves. That's definitely something that happened. But there is also that kind of, that awareness around your personal bias and, your confirmation bias, whatever. That's kind of my big thing at the moment is looking at my own confirmation bias and trying to figure out. But it's kind of my number one thing, when I stand up in front of anybody and start teaching them, I can share my own experience. Absolutely, and I'm sure in the experiences that I'm sharing, I have absolutely questioned them, and I have run them through the mill. I have been rigorous in my testing. I, try to stay aware. I try to make sure that everything I'm saying can be backed up. And if it can't be backed up, I'm very clear about that kind of differentiation of like, this is my personal gnosis, this is my experience. As you say, you're so fond of saying your mileage may vary, and that's really important because, there is definitely a tendency to, to put people up on a pedestal and, I don't want that responsibility. I'm sure you don't either, So not that I'm doing this from selfish purposes or anything, but yeah, it's important.
I think, and I see this way too much just in general in the pagan community all around. There's way too much of people making someone an authority where it becomes like, no, but this person said, or, well, we have to rely on this person, or, no, it should always be, no matter who someone is, you should be able to question them and they should be able to back up what they're saying.
Absolutely.
And even if it just comes down to, this is my opinion or this is my experience, then, that's fine. That's honest.
Yeah.
As long as they're not putting it out there as this is an ancient tradition that everyone knows is mythology.
Mórrígan, who would do that? Who would do such a thing? Surely that has never happened in the history of paganism.
Never. Yeah.
No,
and bias, that is a big thing. And I think bias gets a bad reputation a little bit because I think in some cases it's okay to have a particular bias. I own my bias. There are particular authors out there that I am very biased against.
Yep.
And I admit it.
Yeah, but you have that awareness, and that's the difference. You've questioned those, and you've said, "Yeah, actually, I'm going to stand by this."
Yep.
Yeah. And that's the difference.
Yep. And my approach when I write from an academic point of view, I'm pretty nativist, which means that I tend to assume when looking at Irish mythology or archaeology, well, not so much archaeology, but mythology and folklore, that there is genuine pagan bits in there. That it's just a matter of finding them and uncovering them, which in academia that's referred to as nativism.
Yeah.
And that is a bias, but I acknowledge it.
Yeah. And coming at it from that perspective, I mean, I've seen, so I've worked with a lot of archaeologists and, historians professionally and, kind of at government level even, I'm not going to start name dropping, but, names that you would recognize. And having conversations with them and, they're still kind of looking at stuff. And even though they're very loath and they would never go on record to say it, they can see the pagan associations or the pagan roots. And, the amount of times I've had conversations over pints with, where I'm kind of sitting there with my journalistic head on saying, I wish I was wearing a mic right now. Where somebody who on paper is very, very loath to commit to any kind of, nativism, or because it is frowned upon in academia and it's kind of seen as, siding with the ignorant savage, which is, really illustrative of our colonial heritage, I think, and there is that, but that's a bias in itself as well,
Well, anti-nativism is just as much of a bias.
Yeah. And it's far more prevalent and far more kind of harmful, I think, because, well, particularly with the Irish stuff, like I don't think anybody looking at it with a genuinely open mind could not see that there are pagan roots in a lot of what's there, you know, because it's so obvious. I mean, from everything from, you know, bits of spells and rituals that are kind of that are there, you know, that have kind of survived through different versions, you know, and the one that we have now is Christianized, fair enough, but oh look, there's a pagan version, you know,
Right.
and it's
Well,
obvious.
there's definitely some that, you know, they're not even remotely Christianized. Like
Yeah.
some of the St. Gall's incantations, which are calling on, you know, D and Ket.
Yeah,
like, really, you know,
there's
you
just
can't even pretend that that's
no.
Christian.
You're not even making an effort there. Yeah.
No.
You're just using what fucking works, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah.
Which I love that about some of it. It's like, nope, it worked.
Just
leave it.
Just keep going. Yeah. The Pope in Rome has missed this bit, so we're just going to leave it here in this missal, and you know, it's here. It's just at the back here. You know,
no one will notice.
No one will notice. It'll be fine. Sure, who will ever know? Yeah. So we should probably finish up. I don't even know how long we've been at this. I think it's at least 2 hours, but that's cool. I'm delighted. Yeah.
You know,
hope I haven't taken up too much of your time.
I'm good.
When, you know, you could be writing and I could be writing, but I think this is very important too.
Yeah, I do have a novel, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I can do that
doing
later.
really well with your novels, aren't you?
Yeah, I was laughing earlier when you mentioned the Alhlucra, because I actually I have that in one of my stories.
Cool.
Yeah,
Awesome.
it's a little modified because it's fiction. So
well, there's like a million versions of that story anyway, so you know, I don't think taking a bit of artistic license with it is too much of a problem. So you know, how can people best get in touch with you? I know you have Facebook, which I've put up there, but you have a website too, don't you? A new website?
I do.
Yeah.
It's basically, if you search Morgan Daimler, I think that'll bring it up. It's a YOLA site.
Okay.
Because I'm, as we mentioned, this is how we got started before we started recording. I'm very tech challenged. It's slightly miraculous that you can see me right now.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, as we were talking about, it's kind of miraculous you can hear me, because I spent half an hour wearing my headset without actually remembering to plug it in, you know, so thankfully that was before you came on the line, so I had to
admire my gigantic retro style microphone here.
It's awesome. It's
very fancy. Yes.
It's awesome. So thank you so much. Oh, you have a Patreon as well. I'm just looking at my Patreon down the bottom. You have a Patreon as well, which everybody should support, because we've been talking for, you know, the last hour about your translations, and that is definitely how to support your translations besides buying your books. So it's patreon.com and just your name, isn't it?
Yes. I try to do everything with just my full name. Because that seems to streamline and simplify.
Yeah, absolutely. You can just,
and then I can remember it. So
yeah, exactly. And I just realized that I've actually been pronouncing your name wrong. I've been saying Daimler instead of Daimler, so apologies for that.
That's okay. You can blame my husband for that one. It's his German last name.
No, that's fine. I should have checked that beforehand. So Morgan Daimler, and well, I will see you on Facebook, and I'm sure other people will catch you on Facebook. That's your author page there, isn't it? I didn't put your personal one up by mistake.
No, that's good.
Yeah, so that's cool.
That's good.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much.
Yes,
and
2 hours later, this was fun.
Yeah. And you know what? I think I might throw this. I might just throw this video up on YouTube, and you know, just have it there as a resource to kind of kick things off. Because I haven't got the podcast stuff sorted out yet, and I know that there's people who will absolutely, you know, devour these 2 hours for, you know, for whatever reason. Yeah, so I'm going to throw it up on YouTube, and we'll do something with the podcast. I think we might need to split the podcast into maybe a 3-part series or something. But that is for when I learn how to do the editing later down the line.
Very cool. Yeah, anytime you want to talk with me about anything, we'll
absolutely. I think we should definitely do this again. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Okay, and I'm going to stop the recording.